do any of these individual things, you get some stuff, but there's multipliers every time you do more. But Hank, I hear you saying, we don't make a lot of solar panels or wind turbines or batteries in America right now. How are we gonna be able to source those from America? Oh, don't worry about that. Boom, it's the second biggest thing in the bill, the manufacturing tax credits. Not only do the people buying the thing get the tax credit, but so do the people making the things. We're building out a whole industry here. $37 billion is expected to go toward helping companies make solar panels and battery components and wind turbines, and et cetera, et cetera. And they've gotta be made in the US, and they've gotta hit those wage and apprenticeship requirements. But Hank, you continue to be concerned. Solar power and wind power, they're intermittent. You can't expect them to be on all the time, and those batteries, they're gonna handle some of that shifting, but not all of it. That is right, we need firm power, power that you can turn on whenever you need it. And the biggest piece of cash in this bill that goes toward that goes toward existing nuclear power plants, helping them stay open and keep operating. Existing carbon-free electricity with tax breaks, but only if you meet wage and apprenticeship requirements. Probably just expect that everything you hear about is gonna have wage and apprenticeship requirements, because this bill has to be good for people, and also there need to be people to work on these things, so you need to be training people and you need to be paying them well. Now, also focused on firm power are smaller investments in potential future technologies like advanced nuclear power, advanced geothermal, and advanced biofuels. We don't know which of those things is going to be the best or most impactful, but all of them could end up being important players in carbon-free firm power. All right, so now this hypothetical person who's basically constructing the bill with me is concerned that we're giving a lot of money to power plants, not a lot of money to people. Well, how about $22 billion for you, and another $14 billion after that, and then $12 billion after that. The $22 billion goes to help people upgrade their appliances in their homes, like water heaters, furnaces, stoves, and even just their electrical boxes to handle all of that new electricity. Because guess what? You might not have noticed, your house currently has an exhaust pipe. It is extremely likely that you have power coming into your house in two ways. The electricity that powers the lights and the microwave and your Microsoft Zune, and then there's the gas power that powers your furnace and your water heater and maybe your stovetop, possibly even your clothes dryer. All of that means that your house chugs out CO2, and there isn't an easy way to clean that up without replacing those methane-burning appliances with appliances that run on electricity. And if you can't do that, not only are you just releasing a lot of carbon dioxide, also you're reliant on a single source of fuel for your heat and your hot water, and that fuel price can fluctuate a lot, while electricity costs don't fluctuate as much. And those fluctuations hit low-income people extra hard because fuel costs and energy costs are a higher portion of what they spend their money on. So this $22 billion goes toward helping people buy, and in some cases outright covering the entire cost of appliances that electrify these previously gas-powered things. Heat pumps to heat and cool homes using electricity, heat pump water heaters, electric or induction stovetops. Just buying one of these appliances saves people money in the long term already, but folks usually can't afford the upfront costs of that, especially doing all of these things at the same time. Well, no longer. The next $14 billion are to help people and property owners make their buildings more efficient, and these last $12 billion are for, you guessed it, electric vehicle tax credits that you probably can't use. I know what you're thinking. Oh, that sounded so great until that last part. Why can I not use my electric vehicle tax credit? Because of the third thing. These cars also have manufacturing requirements. And when this bill goes into effect, the number of cars that will qualify for that is quite small, and they will all be sold very quickly. Now, there were already tax credits on electric vehicles, but those credits only apply for the first 200,000 vehicles from each manufacturer, and many manufacturers, GM, Tesla, etc., have already burned through all of those. This extends those indefinitely for the next 10 years, but only if they meet the requirements. Because again, the bill is about all three things. Other countries have had this kind of industrial policy for decades, and that has allowed them to build up their industries producing these things. And the people who crafted this bill, for better or worse, want the US to have that kind of industrial policy. It now looks like we are more than halfway through the things that this bill does. But we are not. Down here, things start to get much more dense, and then you realize that they're actually hundreds of ways that this bill spends money, and each one of them does a different thing for different people in different places. Like, Hank, what about the carbon impact of forest fires? Yeah, that is in there. How about decarbonizing airplane fuels? Yeah, early stages in trying to get that done, that's in there. Converting garbage trucks and city buses to electric, it definitely does that. Tax incentives for existing power plants to capture their emissions, yeah, $3 billion for that. Electrifying most of the postal service fleet, another $3 billion for that. Reconnecting communities cities that were divided by the interstate highway system? Yes, $3 billion for that too. Helping farmers figure out systems for sequestering carbon in their fields? Sure. Cleaning up and electrifying port infrastructure? Definitely that. Early market creation for low carbon building materials? Also in there. New transmission lines, because all of this electrification is going to require a more robust grid? Yeah, that too. Charging stations for EVs? Got that as well. Grants for tribes to invest in clean energy? Got that too. Buying debt from rural power co-ops if they promise to shut down their carbon emitting power plants and giving them money to build new infrastructure? That's in there too. There's a lot of things that are trying to do really specific individual things, but there's also big hunks in here that aren't prescriptive. It's money for communities to do things that they want to do to decrease their impacts. Here's EPA Administrator Michael Regan again talking about that.
A lot of these grant dollars that are in the Act, we're able to give those to community groups who are partnering with universities and incubation centers. The matching dollars and the low interest loans are available to people who have never been at the table. If we get these universities and these young adults, these incubation centers, really tackling these issues with community groups on the ground, these solutions can look 1,001 different ways. And we have to feed all of these solutions to see which ones work for each individual community. We don't have to accept the notion that there's a one-size-fits-all. It can look 1,001 different ways.
But Hank, this hypothetical person who is walking me through this entire bill, is now asking me, why are we doing all of these individual things instead of just doing the one thing? If you did one thing, it would do everything. And that's just to make fossil fuels more expensive.
Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
A few years ago, an ex-lobbyist from ExxonMobil was caught on video saying this.
So nobody is going to propose a tax on all Americans. And the cynical side of me says, yeah, we kind of know that, but it gives us a talking point that we can say, well, what is ExxonMobil for? Well, we're for a carbon tax.
Here's the thing. We passed this bill staring down the highest inflation rate in decades and $5 per gallon gas. There are two ways to incentivize the move toward clean energy. We can make clean energy cheaper, and we can make fossil fuels more expensive. And with people already having a hard time getting their butts to work, nobody in Congress was going to keep their jobs if they intentionally made fuel costs go up. This bill is very nearly all carrots for clean energy, and just a few sticks for fossil fuels. But I will talk about those sticks now, because one of them I love very much. Methane is the most simple carbon-containing molecule, and it is even better at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. Over the short term, it's 80 times better at trapping heat. And as we've moved away from coal and toward natural gas, which is basically just methane, that has been good because methane is a more efficient fuel. You get more heat per carbon dioxide molecule that you release. Except that at every step of the way, methane can leak into the atmosphere. At the wellhead, at the pipeline, at the compressor, at the infrastructure that delivers it to your house, and the facilities that use it. The Methane Emissions Reduction Program provides incentives to fix leaks and acquire more advanced systems for keeping methane from being released. And it also pays for teams to check and see if there are methane leaks and charge increasingly hefty fines to the companies that are releasing this entirely usable, potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. Those fines go up and up and up until they generate a fairly significant amount of revenue as it forces these companies to clean up their act. The other sticks against fossil fuels are fairly minor. They reinstate the Superfund tax, which is basically a big pool of money that polluters pay into, and that money is then used to rehabilitate the damage that they do to the environment. It is a super fund. When I was a kid, I thought it was the Superfund program. It's not that. There's also an increase in the percentage of money that the government gets back from oil companies when they take oil and gas off of federal land. And finally, there's an increase in the cost of holding a lease without developing it, so just having it sit there and not using it, there's an increase in that cost. Both of those are basically ways to disincentivize companies from using federal lands to produce oil and gas. So there are a couple of things to keep fossil fuels a little more under control, but mostly we want their costs to remain steady or even go down as demand for them decreases because the alternatives are just better. But also, weirdly, there's a couple of carrots for fossil fuels.
And I would do anything for love.
Since we are obsessed with anything and everything that makes us feel bad, if you've heard anything about this bill, you have heard that Joe Manchin, moderate Democrat, forced the inclusion of a few very weird provisions. First, and most frustratingly, he took a few oil and gas leases in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico that Trump had authorized and then Biden had paused and people have been fighting against for years, and was like, you want my name on this? You make those leases happen. It's super weird. It's super frustrating. It's outside of the normal process. No one likes this. except for, of course, the oil and gas companies in Joe Manchin. And the other thing was basically a way to prevent any president or lawmakers in the next 10 years from banning fossil fuel leases on federal land. And it does this by tying the ability to put clean energy projects on federal land to a requirement to offer leases for oil and gas drilling on other separate federal land. Now, an offered lease is not a sold lease, and a sold lease is not an oil well, but it is still disappointing, kind of gets stuck in your throat, even if modelers show that the overall carbon effectiveness of the bill only goes down by about 2% because of these provisions. So Manchin, I guess, got what he wanted out of it, which is everyone talking more about how he loves fossil fuels and they're his pretty little baby than the entire rest of the bill. And also, he got to be like one of the title names on the bill, despite being one of its biggest opponents. So now the right question to ask is all of this going to work? And luckily, I have prepared for you more squares. Each one of these is roughly 5 million fewer tons of CO2, and by 2030, there are 200 of them. So that's roughly 1 billion fewer tons of carbon dioxide per year. Here's where we'll be. Decreased CO2 in transportation saves us 280 million tons per year. Cleaner power generation saves us 360 million tons. Cleaner industry saves us 130 million. Cleaner buildings save us around 70 million tons. Same for the equivalent carbon dioxide effects of mostly methane, but also other greenhouse gases produced by cars like nitric oxides. And finally, carbon sequestration in agricultural and forest lands gets us a final 80 million tons. And of course, we do not pause there. The effects of these changes are projected to get us down another 500 million tons by 2035. I'm aware that there are going to be people who are going to be mad at me for being pretty unapologetically excited about this bill. Like, I'm mad that we lost the Civilian Climate Corps, which would have been thousands of young people working on the ground on these problems. I am frustrated that we lost a lot of due process on these oil leases, and they weren't even something that I was actively working on, so I can't imagine what it must be like for the people who've been fighting those battles. Look, I don't know if it's that I'm old now, or that I'm privileged in like 1,000 ways, or that I've been through a number of climate fights that went very badly. Or maybe I'm just thinking practically about the fact that this might be our last chance to get something substantial done for years, like many years maybe, especially because there was every likelihood that this could have just not happened, like many other parts of the original Build Back Better didn't happen. In fact, 4 measly weeks ago, it seemed like it wouldn't happen. I got to talk to Jesse Jenkins about that.
I was on vacation with my family, or leaving for vacation, and I got the call from Senator Schumer's staff that the bill was dead. Same phases of grief, right? Shock, loss, anger. And some people stopped at anger and they just got mad at Joe Manchin on the internet and yelled at, got cynical like you were talking about. And some of us, including some members of, a handful of members of the Senate, again said, no, this is not how it's going to end. I refuse to accept that. So this is also bargaining, right? That's one of the phases of grief. And we went back to work and we bargained, and it, against all odds, it worked. I had pretty well given up hope that it was going to succeed at that point, given this is the second time the rug was pulled out from under us. I wanted to be able to tell my kids that we fought to the very end, and it worked. And I am so grateful. I'm going to tear up a little, for all the people really that did that, because it was very, very close to failure.
I don't harbor any illusions that I live in a perfect world or a perfect country or that perfect legislation exists. There are 330 million of us. The fact that we get anything done at all is a little impressive. And over the last 10 years, we have made tremendous strides in cutting carbon emissions, and that has been in large part because of government investment in the US and elsewhere. Between 2009 and 2017, America spent around $20 billion per year fighting climate change. Over the next 10 years, we will spend $80 billion per year. There are a lot of super powerful people who have been working really hard this whole time to slow this down as much as they can. First, they say it doesn't exist. Then they say it's not caused by people. Then they say it's caused by people, but it's not that big of a deal. Then they say it's that big of a deal, but the costs to take it on are too great. We have hit them with reality at every step in that process, and we are going to hit them with reality at this step of the process too. They will tell us that the costs are too great, and after we prove to them that it's not, they will tell us that it's too late. Nothing gets done if you don't believe it can't be done. And I, for the first time in decades of this, have started to believe that it can be done. It's happening, I think, for 2 reasons. One, because of the very hard work of a lot of people, from policy to science to communication, outreach. And 2, because it is getting hard to ignore the very real effects of all of this extra energy in our atmosphere and in our oceans. We might be in a very narrow window here. a moment when the effects are too present for anyone to ignore anymore, but not so present that they will hold us back from implementing solutions. I don't know how long that window's going to be open, and I was not sure that it was open until somebody did something and said something, and they kept working, and they kept pushing, and they kept making the case that this needed to be done until it got done. But now it feels like the window's open. It does not feel like we are done. One big step does not get you over the mountain pass. There is much more to do, but as I've been saying, I am more optimistic now that this is a challenge that we can actually take on than I have been maybe in my entire career. John, I'll see you on Tuesday. Heads up, my full interviews with Jesse Jenkins and Administrator Regan are up over on Hank's channel. I learned a ton from both of them. They were fascinating conversations. There's links in the description. And also just a general thank you to everyone, and there are thousands of you, who worked in some way on this bill, either advocating or writing or doing policy analysis. Like, it's a big thing, both on my behalf, but also on behalf of, like, my son, who's going to be around for more of this future. And I want his future to be one that I can believe in, one where the fair rides that he loves so much are powered by clean energy. And you're helping with that, so thanks. Good morning, John. A series of widely sighted, unidentified drones observed in the sky. Described as having blinking lights and a wingspan of about 6 feet. The drones fly in groups of 6 to 10 and are usually seen between 7 and 10 p.m. Law enforcement officials stated that the size and number of drones makes it unlikely that they are being operated by hobbyists. Other officials say that the drones do not appear to be malicious and are not violating laws, although they say the situation is very unnerving for our citizens. Over the last month, there have been thousands of sightings of objects like this. There are videos of oddly shaped objects in the sky. Government officials reported that the drones were invisible to radar, leading to speculation that they were somewhat advanced military technology. Congressman Jeff Van Drew reports that Iran has a mothership off the coast of New Jersey that could be the source. People started pointing high-powered lasers at the drones. Strange glowing areas of sky were detected. Tons more strange lights were seen, some apparently just orbs, and possibly those orbs were interacting with the drones. Local agencies sent up their own drones to inspect the mysterious drones. Politicians from the local to the national level called for more transparency. I start getting text messages from friends showing me suspicious videos. The former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, on Twitter posts a video of strange lights in the sky. The internet discourse is all over the place. This might be aliens, or a deep state conspiracy to take the presidency away from Donald Trump, or an intentional distraction from the frustration with the healthcare industry and the murder of Brian Thompson. The government vows to figure out what the heck is going on and sends drone spotting radar to New Jersey. Something very interesting and extremely important is going on. So let's start with the first sightings. I, of course, do not know what they were. I am confident in saying that I don't know what they were, but I'm also much less confident than most people seem to be that they were at all weird. So one of the weirdest things reported about the drones is that they could not be spotted by radar, and this makes them sound very fancy and mysterious, but drones can't be spotted by radar, usually, because they fly too low and are too small to distinguish from birds. This does make them kind of a pain in the butt, because if you spot a drone in an area, you might not be able to land an emergency helicopter because you know the drone is there, but you don't know exactly where it is, and helicopter rotors hitting drones is very bad. The other weird thing about the drones is that they are very big, and this is reported widely as a fact, and I'm not sure why. The human brains detect the size of an object in a bunch of different ingenious ways. The first one is the one we mostly think about. You look at the size of it and how much actual space it takes up in your visual field, and then you combine that with how far away that image is. And your brain can actually figure out how far away something is by combining information from each eye, which gives you what's called depth perception. So if you have two eyes, you can kind of figure out how far away stuff is. But depth perception only works to about 18 feet away from the observer. Beyond that, the two images are basically the same, and our brains can't distinguish it anymore. But the tools do not end there. If the thing is the shape of a squirrel, your brain has no problem thinking, well, that thing is probably the size of the squirrel. But if the squirrel is standing next to an acorn that is the same size as the squirrel, our brains then have to choose between that must be a very big nut or that must be a very small squirrel. And it would conclude that's a big nut, because nut-sized squirrels are a lot less likely than squirrel-sized nuts. But with objects in the sky, this is much harder. First, unless we are familiar with the exact thing in question, it's hard to judge the size when it's more than 20 feet away and there's nothing to compare it to. And our brains might try to compare it with objects in the distance, like buildings, which might make it seem very large, like how the moon seems big when it's next to a mountain, but quite small when it's all alone in the sky. It is a known optical illusion. This video here is a pretty good example. There are two drones flying here, and there's a plane that flies between them. Now, there's no way to know for sure how close those drones are to the observer and how far away the plane is. The person recording the video clearly thinks that they're about the same distance away from her and that the plane is flying between the drones, but there's no way to know that information, and to my eye, the plane is clearly much farther away. If the plane and the drones were the same distance away, those drones would be very big, and there is no way for a person to know which case you are in. And this all gets especially tricky at nighttime, when you're looking at a collection of points of light rather than an object that has some shape and space to it. Now look, I'm not saying that these drones weren't the size of SUVs. Absolutely, maybe they were. But the news has reported this as reports of car-sized drones. And there is plenty of evidence for reports of car-sized drones, but I haven't found any evidence of car-sized drones. And before I looked into this, I had heard reports of car-sized drones so much, I assumed car-sized drones were a thing that we were dealing with. I totally assumed it was true, and if I lived in New Jersey, you better believe I'd be spending a lot more time looking up than I usually do. Earlier in this video, I said the sentence, "Over the next month, sightings of these objects has spread." And a very normal way to interpret that sentence is, over the next month, there were more of these objects. But that's not what I said. I said that sightings of these objects has spread, and that is definitely true. Now, if you assume that there's something very weird going on, then it would be normal for the weirdness to be geographically centered. Maybe there's an Iranian mothership. Maybe there's a weird military test going on. Maybe the aliens have arrived and are set up under the water off the coast of New Jersey. But if you assume that more people looking up is going to result in more people being confused about things in the sky, and if they have been given prior information to expect large drones, then in the absence of reference objects or depth perception data, they are going to be more likely to interpret what they see as large drones, and that would also be geographically centered. People who live in the areas where large drones have been reported are going to be looking up more often, and some of those people are going to report large drones. When we are primed to see a certain thing, we are more likely to see it. This has been studied in a million ways. My favorite dumb way is asking people to identify a loaf of bread, and when you see it in a kitchen, people are like, "That's a loaf of bread." But when you put it in a barn, people take forever to figure out what it is. In another study, people were shown a flash of a threatening face, and they were then more likely to report that a neutral face was scary. Now, we do know that many of the objects in the sky reported to be large drones are definitely not large drones. This video that a friend sent to me, worried about what might be happening, is a sped up video of airplanes coming into land in New Jersey. Our brains aren't good at processing information like this. Single dots sped up over timescales, moving at different angles to each other and different distances away from the observer. That's not what we were built for. This video of something in the sky being trailed by something is also a weird one. I get why that looks strange. It looks strange. The person recording this video is talking and assumes that it's a drone, though it is very clearly a plane, and once you know that, it makes it more clear that the line behind it is just a strangely oriented water condensation trail left by the heat of the jet engines. And the lights Larry Hogan saw and tweeted, turns out, and this is a little bit embarrassing, they were stars. But this is the kind of thing that happens when people are confused and worried and looking at the sky when they usually don't look at the sky, and they're primed to be expecting something strange. And here's the thing, elected leaders saying there's nothing going on here, you're just imagining it, is the wrong thing to do. Both because no one is sure 100% what the original drones were, or if they are something to be concerned about, and also because people do not react well to being told they're wrong, especially by people who are supposed to represent their interests. That feels really bad. And so, making all of this weirder is that police and maybe other agencies have been sending up big drones to figure out what the other drones are. And those big drones are then spotted and posted online because there's no easy way to know if you're looking at a big drone that's somehow illicit or a big drone that is hunting for the illicit drones. And then there's also non-drone stuff. As people have been looking up, they're seeing things that are very weird, but definitely aren't drones. These orbs, for example, these are We've been looking at these for a long time. When a point of light is out of focus, it does not just look blurry, it creates a particular shape. These are wonderfully called circles of confusion, which is not actually about being confused when you see them in the sky. It's about a different thing. But they're often just also called blur spots. You combine that with wiggles caused by slight temperature differences in the atmosphere and imperfections or dirt or oil on the lens, and this is exactly what you get. This is a very well-known phenomenon, so most of those reports haven't been taken seriously, but it's the kind of thing that happens when more people are pointing their cameras to the sky and zooming in on things that are beyond the abilities of their phones to zoom in on. And then to continue the cycle, shortly after something like this begins, there will be intentional hoaxes. This video was being taken credulously on TikTok, but it was posted on the same account that posted this very similar video that I think we can all agree is fake. That creates further desire to look up into the sky and further confusion when people see things that aren't immediately identifiable, which is more likely when the government is trying to take concerns seriously, so they're saying, we're taking your concerns seriously on the news, which sounds a lot like, this is serious, even though those are definitely not the same things. But then they're proving they're serious by sending drones up into the sky, and then people point lasers at the drones, causing the clouds to glow. It's a mess! We're in a mess! I kinda can't believe no one is saying this! But we already know that it's bad politics to tell people that it's probably nothing and they're just seeing things. But it's also important to note that it's good politics to be loudly and vocally concerned, to place yourself in opposition to the powerful people trying to hide stuff. And, of course, to take the concerns of your citizens seriously. Even if your advisors are telling you that this is probably nothing but a social contagion caused by fear and confusion and the primordial human urge to be concerned about objects in the sky, the right thing to do is to call on the federal government to give you a drone detection system. And the right thing for the federal government to do is to give you a drone detection system, which makes it all seem like it's quite a big deal, because why would the federal government be sending New Jersey a drone detection system if it weren't a big deal? I think some of these politicians should probably be a bit ashamed of themselves. The guy who said that there was an Iranian mothership off the coast of New Jersey did at least walk that back, and I hope that it damages his credibility at least a bit. But there just is simply no drawback to going on the news and saying, we don't know what's going on, we need the feds to give us drone spotting radar. And then that makes people more concerned and more primed to see small drones as big ones and anything else as something very weird. Now, there's some of you out there thinking right now, Hank, I do not understand how you think you know that there's nothing weird going on here. And let me tell you two things. First, I don't know that nothing weird is going on. Perhaps there is some kind of secret government project going on that kicked all of this off, and we're never going to know about it because, of course, I am certain, as are you, that our government is experimenting with drones that we do not know about. I would expect them, if they wanted to keep it a secret, to do those tests in areas of the world that are less populated than the most populous area of the whole country, but you never know. I don't know. But I do know a bunch of things. First, these objects are most likely to be spotted between dusk and 11 p.m., which overlaps very tightly with when people are both awake and it is dark outside. And that makes it much easier to mistake a plane for a drone or a small drone for a large drone. I also know that these objects are all using FAA-regulated lighting, which makes them very visible when, if they simply turned those lights off, no one would have ever known that they were there. That makes me feel like it's a lot less likely this is anything nefarious. And the third thing I know is that we have a very long history of seeing things in the sky that freak us out, and then they turn out to be nothing out of the ordinary. And one last thing I know, something that I don't think anybody else knows. The introduction to this video was plagiarized from a Wikipedia page, and the title of that page was 2019 to 2020 Colorado Drone Sightings. Good morning, John. A series of widely sighted, unidentified drones observed in the sky, described as having blinking lights and a wingspan of about 6 feet. The drones fly in groups of 6 to 10 and are usually seen between 7 and 10 p.m. Law enforcement officials stated that the size and number of drones makes it unlikely that they are being operated by hobbyists. Other officials say that the drones do not appear to be malicious and are not violating laws, although they say the situation is very unnerving for our citizens. At the end of that month, Vice published an article titled "The Colorado Mystery Drones Weren't Real," outlining that upon investigation, almost all of the sightings were easily explained as either commercial aircraft or stars or planets or small recreational drones. And it is interesting to me that these two incidents both happened around Christmas time. Possibly parents are buying drones for their kids and they want to fly them at night when their kids have gone to sleep to make sure they know how they work before Christmas morning. And possibly, the parents are also kind of enjoying having fun with the drones. People often ask me why I am so skeptical that there are aliens, and first, I'm not. There are definitely aliens. It is a very large universe. I just haven't seen any compelling evidence that aliens are here. For some reason, aliens always exist in ways that are unfalsifiable. Either they are covered up by the government, or they're able to turn invisible at any moment. There's never a way to prove that the alien isn't there. And when aliens exist in ways that can be disproven, we keep disproving them. What happens, especially with the alien stuff, is something that we can't immediately explain occurs, and in the space where I don't know should live, people will put aliens. Possibly because we're just so uncomfortable with the idea of I don't know. But here's one thing that I have learned. It is always a mistake to think that I don't know is a good reason to believe I do know. And if you didn't understand that sentence, let me explain it with something that is encoded into the language of aliens. We used to call objects in the sky that we could not identify unidentified flying objects because they were unidentified. We didn't know. But so many people left from I don't know to I do know that UFO quickly stopped meaning a thing that I can't immediately identify and became a word for aliens. They literally filled in I don't know with I do know. Unidentified means aliens. People send me weird videos on the internet and I try to help them understand their world better. That's like one of my jobs, and I love that part of my job. It's fun. And whenever I see something like this, whether it's showing a second sun in the sky or a weird sparkly tumbling cloud, I have a tool that works super well. When I don't know what it is, I start by saying to myself, I don't know what that is, but it's definitely a physical phenomenon. And then maybe I figure out that the sun was reflected in a double pane of glass, or a piece of foam from a foam party got picked up by the wind. And sometimes I don't figure it out. And in those situations, I live with I don't know. Because I do know that there is an answer, I just don't know what it is. And if we answer I don't know with something that could answer any question the way that aliens can, then we stop searching and we'll never find any new knowledge. So, I don't know what the first things that kicked all of this off were. I don't know if they were big or weird or top secret or just hobbyists with weird drones, or even just normal drones that looked big for some reasons. But I do know a bunch of stuff. I know how hard it is to hear there are reports of car-sized drones and not discard the word reports and instead just hear there are car-sized drones. And I know how priming works and how social contagions are often geographical and that politicians have incentives to get on the news and that the government has incentives to listen to its citizens and that people are fascinated with the sky. And I know that it is very easy to think I don't know is a good reason to believe something is being hidden from us rather than we don't have a lot of information here is probably nothing that interesting. But if it wasn't interesting, then why is the government so concerned? We're people. All of us. Larry Hogan's a person, Jeff Van Whatever's a person, you're a person, I'm a person. We live on a planet in space. We have drones and airplanes and cell phone cameras and mass media and Twitter and TikTok, and it's weird and it's amazing. And it can be hard to make it all work in a world this strange with 8 billion of us trying to make it work together. In part because there's just so much to know. But here's the thing, we only know any of that because we let I don't know exist for a while as we try to figure stuff out. John, I'll see you on Tuesday. If you like this video and you think I did a good job, I've got a store that donates all of its profit to charity, and you can still get gift cards to give to your friends and family and loved ones during this holiday season. And right now, you can get 10% off any gift card with the coupon code STRANGECLOUD. That's the coupon code STRANGECLOUD at good.store.
In 1928, a young man shuffled onto a stage in Germany to present a lecture on his recent work. He had a slightly unusual presentation style. Physicist Eugene Wigner described the lecture as detached, almost like a recitation of a technical text. He said the man spoke without giving any sign of enjoying his own lecture. But the work this strange, unassuming man presented was about to send some of the most famous quantum physicists of the 20th century spiraling. After the lecture, Werner Heisenberg described the man's theory as the saddest chapter in modern physics. Heisenberg also wrote to Niels Bohr,
Some remarkable new information now has been released about the crash of Greg Biffle's Cessna Citation 550 just outside of Statesville, North Carolina. The NTSB now has gotten in front of the camera 2 times over the weekend to give us briefings and details about that tragic incident. What we know so far is this: 7 people on board so far have perished in that crash. 3 of those people were pilots, had held pilot's licenses, and I'm going to talk about those pilot's licenses. In fact, I'm going to show you the pilot's license of the 3. And only one of those 3 was qualified or type rated, as they say, on the Cessna 550. So to be clear, the NTSB has not come out with who the pilot at the controls was precisely, but there was only one qualified, and I'll lay all that out for you. I want to go back and do a review here real quickly of what happened in this very short incident, just less than 10 minutes airborne. Something dramatic went wrong with that airplane shortly after liftoff. They come back around, and let me show you the ADS-B data. Now, they take off a runway 10 out of Statesville. They start a left-hand turn. They get up to about 1,200 feet above ground level. At some point in that part of the flight, they're going to start raising the flaps and cleaning up the airplane. They begin to accelerate. They get to 197 knots, and then something goes wrong. They stop their climb and they start to descend, and it's a rather steep descent. They get down to about 500 feet above the ground. Then they kind of slowly climb back up. Then there's another steeper climb as they start a left-hand turn back to the airport. This is not in their flight plan at all. This airplane at this point should be 3, 4, 5 minutes into the flight, climbing out, passing 10,000 feet on their way down to Bradenton, Florida, where they were going to go to that event. So they're coming back to the airport. There's another steep descent. There's another steep climb. They come back to the airport. It looks like they set up for runway 10, the same runway they took off from. The weather at the time is marginal VFR. It's kind of coming and going. They're sort of in and out of the clouds. They break off the approach to runway 10 for some reason, start what we call a teardrop back to runway 28. That's really no problem since there were no winds that day. It was calm, so they could land on any runway. This is also an uncontrolled airfield, so it's not like the tower has to clear them. All they have to do is clear themselves. The NTSB told us that the airplane was fully configured, meaning that the landing gear was down and the landing lights were on. When on approach to runway 28, the airplane got so low that it struck one of the approach light stanchions. That's what caused the event where they crashed into the ground. And you can then see after that the fireball. I'm going to show you the video. That's the moment of impact of this flight, and that's the review up to this point. Now, the NTSB has gotten in front of the camera, as I said, 2 times to talk about what happens. They've talked about what did happen, and then there's a lot that they didn't say as well. There's a history I'm going to share with you of the Cessna Citation 550. There have been some incidents, and I'm going to go over a few of those with you. One of them, the 4th one, is remarkably similar to this one. And then, how does the NTSB get to the bottom of what happened in an accident like this? Well, it's very scientific the way they do it. One of the things that they told us in front of the camera was that there was no flight data recorder, no black box for this flight. There was a cockpit voice recorder. That's different. And so how do they recreate an accident when they don't have a black box recorder? Well, it's a little bit more nuanced than if they do have one. It's helpful to have one, but they don't need it to put the whole thing back together. And I'll explain why to you. All right, let's take a look now at the aerial view of the crash site the day after and take a look at what we can see and what we can't see. All right, this all gets, you can see there the burned out hull of the airplane. The NTSB investigators now taking a look. The cockpit is, there's some parts of it remaining. What we see from this video is this. It's what they call 4 points. And first thing they look at a crash site is, can they account for all 4 points? What are those? The nose, the tail, and the end of both wings. And the NTSB said they could account for all 4 points in this crash. Clearly, the fire afterwards burned the aircraft down to just a bunch of ash. But there is enough here that they can begin to take a look at the engines. Was it an engine failure? Was it some sort of flight control failure? And one of the things they said at this latest briefing was that they've retrieved the Garmin flight system from the airplane. Now that's really, really important. The Garmin flight system, if they can retrieve data from it, will work kind of in place of a flight data recorder. Now, it's not the same device. It's not designed to survive a 300G impact and then get information out of it. It's just how they fly the airplane. But it does record all of the data, and it will give investigators a look at what they were doing, airspeeds, altitudes, commands that the pilot was giving the airplane, all of that stuff. If they can retrieve the data from it. All of those things have little SIM cards in them, and if that SIM card was intact or they can retrieve the data from it, there's going to be a wealth of information there. Now, how does the NTSB look at an investigation? We're going to follow the exact format that they do here today. Number one, they look at the weather at the time, then they look at the pilots, then they take a look at the aircraft itself, and you can see the picture of the aircraft that they're taking a look at right now, and then they look at historical events, similar events in the past that look like this, to glean all of that information, put it all together, and come up with what they think was the most likely thing that happened here. So here's what we do know. There were 3 qualified pilots aboard the airplane that day. Only one was type rated in the Cessna Citation 550. Now, we don't know who was at the controls, but only one should have been at the controls, and his name was Dennis Dutton. Dennis is a retired Delta captain. He's now 67, or he was 67 years old at the time of the crash. And he had a long career, a wonderful career at Delta. And he is most likely who was at the controls of that aircraft. If he wasn't there, that's another issue for another day. But let's take a look at his pilot's license. I've got a copy of it right here. And his pilot's license shows all the airplanes that he was type rated on. So he was type rated on the A320, 330, the 350, several Boeing aircraft, the 737, 757, and then you see right down here on the second row, the ACE 500. That is the Cessna 500 series, the Cessna Citation 500 series. Now, down at the bottom of his license is a very important thing. It says, under limits, CE 500 second in command required. That means he was not allowed to fly single-piloted a Cessna Citation 500, 550. He had to have somebody that was a second-in-command qualified on that airplane. What we know from the other pilot licenses, and I'll show you them in a second, nobody else had a Cessna Citation 500 second in command qualification. So there wasn't one. So does that mean he was not allowed to fly this airplane? Not necessarily. He may have had a waiver to be single piloted on this aircraft. We just don't know. That's some of the information that the NTSB will give to us in the weeks ahead. But right now, we know that he was qualified on this airplane, needed a second in command, and we don't know whether he had a waiver to be single piloted or not. I will tell you that the three Cessna Citation pilots I've talked to over the weekend all told me that they would not fly a Cessna Citation single piloted. They just wouldn't do it. That was their personal preference. Even if they had to waiver, they said they wouldn't do it. It's just a complicated airplane. There's a lot going on. That's their opinion. But again, I got that from reliable sources. Now, the other 2 pilots, one was his son, and I think his son went by Jack. Dennis Dutton is his name. Dennis Charles Dutton. He is a student pilot. You can see here at the bottom of his license. Student pilot. He doesn't have any qualifications, no medical information yet. He was at the time training to be a licensed pilot. And that's all the information we have about him. So it was most likely that he wasn't in the seat. The third pilot was Greg Biffle himself. All right, now he's the owner of the airplane. And it says that Greg, his medical was up to date, 2 of 2025. Those second-class medicals are good for a year, so he was due again next February. Private pilot, it says. Private pilot license. What ratings did he have? Single engine land, single engine, multi-engine land, and rotor aircraft helicopter. He had no limits, but he also didn't have any type ratings. So if he had a type rating, you would see it under ratings and it would say CE-500. He wasn't type rated on the aircraft that he owned. Presumably, that's why he had Dennis Dutton on board who was qualified to fly the airplane. Now, let's talk real briefly about the transition from a commercial airline pilot, a Delta, American, United, doesn't make any difference, a Part 121 carrier, that's what they are, to the Part 135 or the Part 124 or the civilian general aviation world, because it bears, I've got to talk about it a little bit, right? At age 65, you are, by Congress, forced out of your job as a commercial pilot. That's a completely different world over there. At my airline, virtually everything other than flying the airplane was done for me. I had a dispatcher that got the flight plan. I had weather briefers that gave me the weather briefing. I had all sorts of information on my iPad. I didn't have to lift bags and put them in an airplane. I didn't have to take care of loading passengers on an airplane or getting them off. I didn't have to do any of that. I concentrated solely on flying the airplane, and I had a magnificent team of people to back me up. Once you get out of that world and you get into the general aviation world and the Part 135s, the Part 124s, and the other parts that it's a totally different world. You're the chief cook and bottle washer. You're not only flying the airplane, you're loading the bags, you're filing the flight plan, you're fueling the airplane, you're making sure everything is taken care of. You're getting your own weather brief. That's a completely or a remarkably different world from the one that you just came out of. It doesn't mean that you're not qualified for it. It just means that you're brand new at all those things. And it's a workload increase that you're not familiar with. People that have been in general aviation their whole lives, they're familiar with doing all of that. For them to go to a commercial airliner, that might be quite a transition. It's a transition to go from one to the other. Dennis had done that. But what I'm saying is there's a lot going on when you make that transition. Now, let's talk about the NTSB briefing and what they said and what they didn't say. Here's the things that they said initially. The flight was less than 10 minutes long. We know that. 7 people were on board, 3 were pilots. There was a text message sent by one of the people on the airplane. Many of you have read about this in the news. The NTSB said the family has allowed them to say what the text message was, but not who sent it. So we don't know. We don't have verified who sent it at this point. But the text message read only 2 words, and it said emergency landing. So anything else you've read in the news or you've heard about, the official information from the NTSB themselves was that only 2 words were transmitted, emergency landing. What could that mean? Was there an emergency on board with a person, or was there an emergency with the airplane? Now, I think based on the flight profile of the airplane, it's reasonable to assume something was wrong with the airplane, not somebody on board. If somebody's sick on board, you're going to continue to climb out. You're going to contact ATC. You're going to get a nice instrument approach in someplace. Everything's going to be stabilized. This unstable turnaround and come back to the airport, most likely something was wrong with the airplane. I'm going to give you 4 case studies. The 4th one, it's remarkable. All right. So the aircraft first struck the lights, the approach lights to the runway. The airplane was fully configured according to the NTSB, which means the landing gear was down and the landing lights were on when it struck that first light stanchion. It was slow and it was low. According to the NTSB investigators that were in front of the camera, they said that those lights were on the same level, or actually at one point a little bit below the surface of the runway. So they were really, really low as they were coming in. There is no flight data recorder on this aircraft, but there was a cockpit voice recorder. Now, why one and not the other? Well, none of that cockpit voice recorder or flight data recorder is required on this particular aircraft. It depends on what they're doing with it. And in a former life, this airframe's over 40 years old. In a former life, it was a Part 135 aircraft, and they required cockpit voice recorders, but not flight data recorders. So that's why it had one and not the other. Now it's owned by a civilian concern. It doesn't have to have either. But fortunately for us, it has a cockpit voice recorder. The NTSB said it's up in Washington, D.C. right now being deciphered. So they're trying to get the information off of it. Hopefully it will glean some really good information. This 4th scenario I have for you, the cockpit voice recorder played a huge role in that, all right? And then finally, the Garmin flight system has been removed from the crash, and it's also up in Washington, D.C., and they're trying to get some good information from it. Okay, now the NTSB, they looked at the weather already. Marginal VFR, they said. They looked at the 3 pilots so far, all right? And we looked at their pilots' licenses. Now, let's take a look at some of scenarios that have taken place with Cessnas over the years. And the first 3 I'm going to go through kind of quickly. The first is from It's from Pueblo, Colorado, from back in February of 2005. It's a Cessna 560 that crashed, but it's a variant of this airplane. The executive summary reads like this. On February 16th, 2005, about 9:13 Mountain Standard Time, a Cessna Citation 560 operated by Martin Air for Circuit City stores. Remember them back in the day? Circuit City's long gone. It crashed 4 nautical miles east of Pueblo Memorial Airport, Pueblo, Colorado, while on an instrument landing system approach to runway 26 right. Next paragraph, the National Transportation Safety Board determined that the probable cause of the accident was a flight crew's failure to effectively monitor and maintain airspeed and comply with procedures for de-ice boot activation on the approach, which causes an aerodynamic stall from which they did not recover. So they didn't operate the boots on the front edge of the wing properly. Ice built up. It caused an aerodynamic stall because the wings just lost lift, and they didn't recover from it. Contributing to the accident was the Federal Aviation Administration's failure to establish adequate certification requirements for flight into icing conditions, which led to the inadequate stall warning margin provided by the airplane's stall warning system. This one is weather related. So the first thing they're going to look at is weather related issues. So they start there. That's kind of the low hanging fruit. I don't think weather was a huge factor here in Statesville, although weather was moving in. And so they took off as bad weather was coming in. As they came back to the airport, were they dipping down and climbing up to get in and out of the weather? I don't know. Maybe the cockpit voice recorder is going to help with that. All right, but weather is the first thing that they're going to look at. Now, let's go to 1999. And up in Canada, a possible mechanical issue that could take place with these Cessna 550s. The Canadian authorities wrote this: while complying with a Phase 5 inspection on a Cessna 2 aircraft, maintenance personnel performing a control column inspection. So that's the yoke. That's the control column is the thing that the pilot uses to fly the airplane, right? To steer the airplane. That doing a control column inspection noted cracks on the control column bob weight supports. So those are underneath the floor, but they noticed cracks on it. The maintenance organization submitted a service difficulty report. That sounds very British to me for some reason. A service difficulty report that stated both left and right supports had cracks near the aft torque tube. The submitter stated that the cracks started in the upper flange of the support and extended into the web area approximately 1 inch from the aft end of the upper edge of the support. And why is all of this important? Here's why. Fatigue stress damage to the balance weight supports may occur by slamming the control columns forward and aft during egress.